Cue motivational music. Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name's Dean and I'm a designer on a quest to further understand the creative industry and learn as much as this noggin will hold. Join me as I share my discoveries and tap into the minds of some of the most well-respected creatives in the world. This is my creative therapy. Hello and welcome to episode 14. So today I'm joined by Amazon's head of design at the Internet of Things, Joanna Peña-Bickley. In this episode, Joanna talks about how she transitioned from journalism into the design industry, how brands are redefining their values, the future of design for new technologies, the working life of an Amazonian, and loads more. It was a real honor to have Joanna on the podcast, and I left feeling super inspired. Also a little bit jealous that she talks such a good design game. Thank you so much for doing this, Joanna. It's a pleasure to have you on and speak to you. I'm a big fan. I've been following some of the work that you've been doing through LinkedIn and other sort of channels for a while now. I see you studied journalism in Chicago. Is that right?
I did. You know what? I actually started out my career as a journalist prior to that point. And when I was in high school, I had an opportunity to intern at a television station. And I was a really good writer. And so I took that opportunity, and what ended up as kind of an internship for a sophomore in high school, which was unheard of at the time because it was generally reserved for college kids. I looked at it and said, you know what, a kid like me is never going to get a front door entry. I'm going to have to kick the side door open to get into any industry. And so I ended up kind of translating that into from, kind of December internship to winter job to they couldn't get rid of me.
Nice.
And so funny enough, as much as I enjoyed writing, when I went to school, what I actually stumbled onto when I was in Chicago was, that love for invention. And so one of the first things that I ever did happened to be around innovating and invention. And, one of my key duties when I was down in Texas as a reporter was, scheduling things like satellite time. Because we're talking about the early 90s, so we still didn't have streaming video.
Yeah.
And so when, I approached it, I was kind of early days and tinkering with technologies like Media 100. And, in those technologies, you had to learn to code, because if you wanted basic animations to video and in that visual storytelling, you had to know that. But looking at that, one of the things that I did was invent one of the first media players in the space that ends up then getting used by TV stations across the United States.
Wow.
And that is how I stumbled in to what I do today. Right. So I was a really good storyteller. I enjoyed loving the story, but the craft of the storytelling, I truly had a passion for. And so consistently, I would find myself, relying back on that key storytelling mechanism, but realizing deep down the thing that I was so passionate about was invention. Right. It was problem solving. And lo and behold, you realize, well, that's core to design.
Oh,
That
yeah.
is what design is. And as every teenager will tell you, and I look back on it and chuckle, like I was the most rebellious teenager, but in fact, I really wasn't, because all I was doing was trying to get away from anything that your parents said you might be good at. And my mother was a designer.
Oh, nice.
So
Okay, that's cool.
and I say was, my mother is a designer. Let me
Wow, that's
start this. She
awesome.
just happens to be retired from a 30-year company design firm that she built in
Wow.
San Antonio, Texas. So here I grew up at the knee of a great designer, right?
Okay.
I just happened to be a tinkerer and innovator, and my passion for design was in technology. What's really interesting to me today is those two things have now come together. They have yet met again in the Internet of Things.
Hmm.
And so that idea that we are designing in technology for space and time, not virtual worlds, but actual space and time in people's lives, and in very specific spaces. So, you know, in commercial real estate, the Internet of Things is growing exponentially.
Hmm.
And so you have to have a background in understanding architecture and the tools that architects and engineers in those spaces use in order for them to connect up these buildings so that they are safe, they are far more efficient, and they provide a service to people when they walk in the door.
Hmm.
So what's interesting to me is that, while as a as a kid, was always an inventor, I would never have said, oh, well, I'm also a designer, right?
Mm.
And what I realized is that is part and parcel of being a designer, is
Mm.
invention. um, and I just have, like I said, utilized technology my entire life, um, as a method to invent new things.
Hmm. No, that's awesome. That's great. It reminds me a little bit of myself, to be honest, if you don't mind me saying. Just
Sure.
because I've always had this sort of this entrepreneurial, I've always been very driven. It's not very often that I come across a creative that doesn't really have a similar sort of mindset. It seems as though whether it's a designer or someone who works in the background of design and strategy or something, we all seem to have this sort of this similar mindset in that anything's possible, and we want to get our work seen somehow. That's great, and it's great to hear that your mum is a designer too. So it runs in the
Yeah,
family.
it
Creativity
is.
runs in
I
the
am.
family.
Here's what I will tell you. I am a second generation designer, and somehow I produced a third generation because
Nice.
my daughter is a light and stage designer in New York City.
Wow.
So that ability to, problem solve,
Mm.
but do so artfully.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
is for me the love of being able to solve a problem. When in my early career, it was solving communications problems.
Okay.
Today it is, and I would say that early in your career, then you were solving business and marketing problems.
Hmm.
And today it's really solving human problems at scale. And that for me has been my life's work, is looking at systematic problems, whether we look at, environment and climate, whether we're looking at the way that we behave every day and that behavior contributes to climate change, or the way, one of the things I'm incredibly passionate about is looking at democracies,
Hmm.
right? And innovating democracies in a way that continues to be open source, but is secure and private.
Yeah.
And so then you can look at a career that, started out in solving small problems, often ones of my own making, um, then, and then, kind of systematically working towards larger and more systematic problems. And my mother's work in, it was interesting because I look back at her career where she solved, commercial and residential problems, and then she got to work in her own firm, systematically for the United States government and working with them as a contractor and designing, everything from core to military bases,
Wow. Okay.
to, really working on some of the big systems plays that they have in the way that the government actually works. So what becomes super interesting to me is that design, as I lay in this generation, is really important to the world at a time when the world has tremendous complexity and problems.
Hmm.
The thing that we're really great at is simplifying and inventing.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's our opportunity to, no matter what kind of designer you are, right, or creative that you are both passionate and, always seeking to kind of up level and frame problems in a way that truly have an impact on people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally true. And just going back to what you were saying about simplifying things, it almost feels like it's so necessary to simplify these things these days, with how quick things have come along and how sort of complex things seem to be. and it reminded me of it might have been your latest article that you did, where I think it was Design 2020, where you said, I've got a quote here, it's Generation Z has arrived and they expect intelligently designed brand experiences. Gen Z's $44 billion of disposable income has triggered a tsunami of change as industries race towards 2020. And in my opinion, it feels like it's kind of in line with what we were saying, but it feels like brands are sort of sitting on the edge, waiting for the next big thing to jump on. And there's that, and there's the uncertainty of whether or not they should be jumping on everything that comes up and all these complex issues, and whether they should just, sit back and take a breath and simplify things.
So if I just widen that aperture a little bit, and I think where brands sit today, right, is look, if you look at industry, and I think it's important for us to open the brand aperture to brands live inside of industries, right? And every brand, small, medium, or large, has a commercial industry. And we are at the nascent stages of the fourth industrial revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And you know this, and you can look back at human history and say that at the nascent stages of an industrial revolution, there are tremendous opportunities because in the 100 years that preceded it, we made things super complex. And so those opportunities of change are simplifying things and getting back to core values. And what I have seen from brands, which is incredibly exciting, is to sit back and redefine their values for the next century.
Mm.
I don't necessarily think they're sitting on the sidelines by any means, but the thing that they are doing is understanding that a brand is not only its marketing message, but the manner in which it engages its customers. And so when you think about that, you go, oh, it's not about what we say to our customers. It's about what we do for our customers.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, just maybe, we're not doing enough to stay competitive. And so therefore, what I need to now do is look back at the entire company and how it is designed to serve my customer versus tell my customer something.
Mm.
And that has triggered everything from a reevaluation of supply chains um, to how companies operate. And the exciting part of where brands are now playing is looking at the enterprise wide and saying the brand is no longer just a holding or an asset of the marketing department, but it
Mm-hmm.
is part and parcel of how we serve our customers
Mm-hmm.
and how easy we make it for them to access our services, or whether it's an actual product, a physical product and good, or you're talking about materials. And what's exciting to me is that for the first time, all the things that were core to branding is core to experience design. And that experience is no longer just a front end marketing problem. That is a CEO level problem
Mm-hmm.
where they're looking, going, you know what? It is time for us to reinvent the way we move around the planet, thus mobility. It is time for us to rethink the way that we power industry with renewable energy. And it is time for us to think about this transformational connectivity that we have, which is the Internet of Things.
Mm-hmm.
Those three forces are at play right now in our society, and they are transforming not just the way that we do things, but the way that we expect our infrastructure to work. And those high expectations truly have an end effect on your customer. And so when you're not simplifying and inventing consistently, your customers get super frustrated. And I bring up this one thing because you and I today sit in democracies that are in crisis.
Yeah.
Um, and I bring this up today so much of, if you think about the brand of democracy, and you think about each one of them has a brand, right? We have ideals and values. That intersection of brand design and the ideals of democracy are actually one in the same. We all have values and we all have things. How we carry out or people experience those values or how those values are potentially accessible to people in these democracies is often the difference between an agitated public, right, and a public who is trusting of their government.
Hmm.
When things are complex and designed in a manner that are complex, you and I know out of the branding world that that does not instill trust.
Mm.
And so most of what we are seeing today is a complete agitation and turnover system of people who expect the Uberization of our democracies.
Hmm.
And so what is exciting is that you're seeing pieces of that start to happen. It's really painful, right? For those of us who are a little bit older and are probably not a little susceptible to change, but that Gen Z, right, are some of the smartest, most articulate leaders
Hmm.
that are inspiring this level of game change. And I think that, like every industrial revolution, the flip side of that revolution is opportunity. And it's an opportunity to think, it's an opportunity to do, and it's an opportunity to design, that life-saving piece of equipment that helps a veteran, right, come back from a wounded warrior and be and have access to work and have access to opportunity.
Mm.
And then it is also an opportunity for us to rethink the way that we engage with government. One of the things, most exciting thing
Yeah.
to me in the Design 2020 research that I did was the work that is being done by these digital groups inside of government and that transformation of democracies in government. And one of the bills that's actually sitting in the United States Congress that was crafted by Kamala Harris is called a Digital Services Bill. That Digital Services Bill stands to create small teams, that small team startup innovative practice that you and I know that within brands has worked for time immemorial for governments to start thinking about how do we rethink the IRS, what, the Internal Revenue Service, and so that
Hmm.
we can pay taxes and with great transparency see where those taxes are applied to in our local governments. You look at that, you look at the Environmental Protection Agency here in the United States, and you say, gosh, all we ever hear about is red tape and regulations. But in fact, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could track and monitor my contribution to the air quality in my city
Hmm.
at an individual level? It's when we start to do those things that we have an opportunity to go, we will redefine what democracy means, and design will lead it, but it will come from that intersection of values.
Hmm.
Right? It will come from that core intersection of, do we understand the pillars of values? And it is no different than the brand work that most large brand companies do when you think about what are the values of this brand, right?
Yeah.
You go back and go, the brand pyramid, you remember those things,
Hmm.
right? So now you start to look at it and go, who are the people who can orchestrate that change? Right?
Yeah.
Who can look and be empathetic to, you know, the things and the needs in some of these emerging spaces. Cannabis, really
Hmm.
interesting thing that's going on here. You look at space and astropreneurship. I've called it democratic design, but that's with a small d, and I don't mean for the party of Democrats. I mean for the purpose of saving democracies.
Yeah.
And then you look at the data and ethics that at this time we actually have to have a conversation about in a time when both of our democracies were attacked by information warfare,
Hmm.
right? And when information warfare is used to confuse society, what that effectively does is slows down the solutioning to the next thing, and it takes people off the sidelines. often to do the wrong thing as opposed to, let's not be a Twitter slacktivist. Let's actually get out and do something for our company or have our companies start working toward its end. So I come from it in a very optimistic space because what I am seeing is there are a lot of both companies and individuals all working towards these ends
Mm-hmm.
in some way, shape, or fashion. You know, 10 years ago, you look at the brands who were talking about sustainability, and it was a very small amount of brands, right? Or that were talking about inclusion or inclusive design of their products.
Mm.
And it was so minuscule. So when you see brands like Unilever, right, and the chief marketing officer
Yeah.
of those kinds of companies spearheading initiatives of not just inclusion, but going far beyond and putting ethics into their brands, I think we're in a new day. And I think branding has a more powerful place than it has ever had, and design can be one of the biggest players in that, because the one thing that I know about designers is that the greatest designers that I've ever worked for, been inspired to work with, are systems designers.
Mm-hmm.
And those systems designers know how to play or conduct the orchestra, right? And it's an orchestra of different disciplines and people, but yet they make music. And sometimes they make jazz, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's hip hop, and it can be all of these great things. But just like a conductor of the orchestra, design, and those creators, right? Whether you were a designer or you're a creative thinker, um, are at the forefront of orchestrating this change in
Mm-hmm.
a time um, where I don't know that we have the choice, and time is of the essence.
It's yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's such a disruptive time, and it's tricky for. I've spoke about this a few times with a few people on the show. It's tricky for how disruptive it is for traditional brands to still communicate the same messages they were 10 years ago today without alienating their existing audience, and it's this massive sort of change, and it's a subject which, yeah, it gets fire under my belly, and
It does. Here's what I will tell you. In the communications thing, I would tell you that most of the we could say 100-year-old brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
I look at 100-year-old brands, and you go back to industries, 100-year-old industries like automotive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, like liquor marketing. You can look at any one of these marketing segments and say, okay, those people have been around for 100 years. But I think what I am seeing systematically happen is that technology, the accepting that you have a choice to sit on the sidelines in the middle of this industrial revolution, which
Mm-hmm.
very likely is going to put you in the position of being disrupted versus the disruptor.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so what everyone is thinking is, how do I disrupt? How do I disrupt? And in reality, I think the conversation needs to go a little bit differently and say, how do I reinvent?
Mm-hmm.
How do I reinvent my business that was doing this in the first 100 years of its existence, so that it can exist for the next 100 years? Right?
Yeah.
And it can exist in a more inclusive and a more profitable way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because that's what most CEOs are up against. And the chief marketing officer has this really unique place today, um, where they were the early leaders often in digital marketing and understanding the tech and the tools.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the CMO is playing a really unique, I kind of call the CMO the CEO whisperer,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Because in the end, what you know for sure is that if your customer experience is phenomenal, there's too much history and too much evidence that say when your customer experience is divine, that so will be your profits
Mm-hmm.
and your bottom line to your shareholders.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no difference. That thread is there. The
Mm-hmm.
proof is in the pudding. What I'm seeing is a time of transformation. right? And so by walking in the marketing door, often what you're going to get is folks who are thinking about what they're going to say to their customer. But what's really been interesting is the emergence of the CXO role, right? The
Mhm.
Chief Experience Officer. Or I've often seen, and I talk about it in Design 2020, which is the emergence of the Chief Design Officer.
Mhm.
And the Chief Design Officer is looking at things in a holistic brand way to say, I'm not just worried about how we look, I'm worried about how we work.
Mhm.
And so that orchestration of marketing, um, and operations and supply chain, right, to get to an end benefit, a faster end benefit to your customers is a winning strategy.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of how well Amazon have done. It seems as though Amazon are a brand who really took risks and went left field when everyone was going right, and sort of just did the unimaginable and the unexpectable, and they're now reaping the rewards massively. And it's a brand that I've sort of been following for years and years and years, and it's super inspiring. I think I might have seen an article where you mentioned Jeff Bezos,
Hmm.
the founder and CEO of Amazon. And I remember seeing the famous photo of him sat in his small office with the Amazon poster in the wall, which looked like the logo had been
Yeah.
graffitied on. And I remember you saying sort of he inspires you and stuff. Do you think is entrepreneurship and his passion for moving into these unknown spaces that do that?
I will tell you, being an Amazonian, we talk about our culture as being peculiar.
Hmm.
But what's peculiar about us is that we are pioneering. And I think, Jeff's, original vision and intent, behind, starting as, the one of the world's, place where you could go get books,
Hmm.
is so at the heart of everything that we do here. It
Okay.
is an incredible culture to work for. And I will tell you, it operates unlike any other company on this planet. And so much of this is because, often leadership principles are principles that they hand you out on the first day. And you walk in and you read them and you go, that's really nice. And then you go about your day. That isn't the
Yeah.
case here. We live our leadership principles. We are measured by our leadership principles. In the end, what we know for sure is that we are customer obsessed. And that has been the absolute credit to Jeff's success. Jeff's original flywheel, it's one of my favorite things that you learn about in your first days of becoming an Amazonian, which was a sketch on the back of a napkin, right? That
Hmm.
put the customer experience at the heart, and a flywheel and these mechanical mechanisms that made the customer experience work.
Hmm.
And so when you think about that, being a leader at Amazon means that we start from our customers and we work backwards from their needs.
Hmm.
And we don't really worry about competitors. So much I remember in my days at, other companies, um, you do these massive competitive analysis, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it's really good to know what your competitors are doing, but most of their strategies were often formulated on your competitor's space in an industry. But when you do something as unique as formulating your entire company's strategy,
Hmm.
um, on vigorously earning and keeping customer trust, all of that doesn't matter. And so
Hmm.
for us, while we pay attention to competitors, we obsess over our customers. And I mean it that if you know the difference between doing the right thing and the wrong thing as a leader is whether or not the right thing is always the win for the customer.
Hmm.
And so having that sense of ownership, I'm not just an employee of Amazon, I'm an owner of Amazon.
Hmm.
And that is so important to being a leader, and I think is so core to the way that Jeff has structured the company, and that we don't work in silos. We are, the way that I look at it, is this dynamic ecosystem of inventors and creators and people that come from all different disciplines, but yet we are owners. And so for that, we don't really look at short-termisms and short-term results, which, before I got here, I remember being at companies where we lived for the quarter,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
right?
Mm.
Our decisions were made on how we were going to deliver shareholder value every quarter versus how am I going to deliver customer value every day, and
Hmm.
don't sacrifice that long-term value for short-term results.
Yeah.
And when you're measured by those mechanisms, when you're measured by, you know, uh, you know, by being a leader who loves inventing things, um, or somebody who is on a place of constantly learning, that if
Hmm.
if you thought you got out of school and you knew it all, this isn't going to be the place for you. But if you
Yeah, of
got out of
course.
school and said that was the first chapter of my learning, right, and my curiosity is going to take me into new possibilities where I'm going to try to explore them, and I'm going to make lots of little bets both on myself and our customers, and we're going to do this together, that is a really unique place to be. And so, I do admire Jeff for being visionary and inclusive, and um, being right a lot. And what I
Hmm.
mean by that is we have a core tenet of not just being right a lot, but also earning trust.
Hmm.
And so it is not from a place of ever being dishonest for self-preservation, because we don't need to do that. I've often found when you are truthful, no matter how embarrassing that truth might be, you actually candidly earn respect from people.
Yeah.
So when I think about that, it's so important that you see how that's the culture that has evolved, and why I, jump out of bed every day to get into an office full of folks who are building something that we truly believe in.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's very few brands I think at the minute who are doing a similar thing. The only ones that spring to mind are Google and Apple. I mean, you think Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook. If you get into social media and stuff, they just seem to be the brands who are just leading the way. And I think you're totally right as well about brands 10 years ago or sooner than that. Looking at the quarter and trying to make money throughout the quarter rather than thinking long term about things, and really paying attention to the customer and what the customer wants. And you can definitely see that on Amazon. If ever I have trouble, you just ring them up and it's sorted within a minute. It's incredible stuff, and that echoes through other things throughout the brand as well. But I mean, yeah, I would love to go into what it is, your role at Amazon. I would give an overview of it, but I definitely wouldn't be able to do it justice if I was to explain what the Internet of Things is and what you're up to there. Can you give us an overview of the Internet of Things and tell us a bit about your role within the team?
Absolutely.
Cool.
So, let me start with, what is the Internet of Things?
Hmm.
At its simplest, the Internet of Things is a neural network of connected sensors, right? That has been growing in, I would say, since for the last 10 years. And it is anything, any device, and I say device, but that could be a sensor, it could be a washing machine, it could be a building that is actually connected to the internet. And so much of these devices put out data. a tremendous amount of data. Some of it is very machine-like data, but where we are striving to get to is in these early days, creating tools that make the Internet of Things far more democratized than it has been in years past.
Hmm.
So, it used to be that if you were going to invest in a new connected device or make something that was new and connected to the internet, it required a tremendous amount of technical knowledge. And so, as we are really looking at this ecosystem that continues to evolve in this neural network, right? The Internet of Things has truly emerged as one of the core drivers of a general technology platform that is revolutionizing our economy.
Hmm.
And you're starting to see that nascent piece of it, and it is playing an enormous role in in the fourth industrial revolution. Often you hear our CEOs talk about it in the form of Industry 4.0,
Hmm.
right? Where they're rethinking how their companies are built and made, but everything has a systematic connectivity to a digital space. And, a lot of that often took a tremendous amount of investment
Okay.
to do that because you needed highly technical folks to do that.
Hmm.
And so my team that I am leading is on a mission to design the world to work for 100% of humanity in the shortest amount of time possible without disadvantage to anybody. Because what we know is IoT is revolutionizing business, and the more companies that have access to it, the better off we are. And that is going to be true of, you know, getting the data from machines and understanding it to create a more efficient ecosystem
Hmm.
or to run more efficiently. Let's say commercial buildings is a really good example of where you start to take a look at things like commercial buildings and say, what is their impact on the environment?
Hmm.
Well, through the Internet of Things, I have a tremendous amount of data that's being out that say if we do these 3 or 4 things right, you can actually start to save more energy. But
Yeah.
what really gets exciting for me is that today, so much of the tools that we are designing, are far more accessible to somebody who does not have command of a command line.
Hmm.
Um, you know, if, so much early in IoT, it was really an IT thing. Right.
Okay.
That was an initiative out of IT, but we are creating products for the operational technologist. That's the COO, the CXO, the CMO to come in
Ah,
and say,
okay.
I want to create a new connected device, or I'd like to connect my enterprise in a way that I make it easier for people to work. And
Hmm.
most of those tools today, like I said, they exist, but they exist really far down in what we call the stack, right? In the technology stack.
Yeah, yeah.
And what's exciting to me is bringing IoT and artificial intelligence together so that what we're doing is not creating a bunch of things that put out more data, because the
Hmm.
reality is we're in cognitive overload over data.
Hmm.
Um, but that we're doing so that what we get to is tools that enable any enterprise of any size to be able to get to an intelligent enterprise. Because an intelligent enterprise will make remarkably different choices about their business model. They will make remarkably different choices about the kind of business they are in when they have the tools to make those choices. Today, they are at a place of they have most people are sitting on top of so much Internet of Things data that they
Hmm.
simply don't know where to begin to sift through it. And often that data takes years to drive insight out of.
Hmm.
And you and I both know, coming out of the world of marketing, insight leads to aha, right? And you go, oh,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
aha, that's an idea. And that idea can transform the operations of a company, not just to work more efficiently, but potentially, you know, to save um, enormous ways of looking at it and going, God, this is also plays into our sustainability plan. This
Mm.
also plays into these other plans that are moving at a snail's pace, because I can't sift through that data, because today it's either sitting in a siloed warehouse, and not in the cloud and not accessible to people so that they can utilize it in the right way.
Hmm.
So if you took it at the 30,000 feet, in 20 years in the future, everything will be connected to everyone, right?
Hmm.
And when everything is connected to everyone, you start to rethink your logistics systems and all those things and how they work. But
Yeah.
fundamentally, to make the change, you actually need tools to be able to do that. And my team is in a place of not just designing the devices, right, but also designing the platforms and the tools
Hmm.
that that companies need to begin their own Internet of Things initiatives.
That's really interesting. I used to work in a team. I'm guessing you guys have worked with the Alexa, the Amazon Echo Alexa.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
That's my favorite Internet of Thing.
No, I absolutely love it. But where I work, we were given a an Alexa when it first came out to play with, and I was working with software engineers and coders, and really really smart guys, and their task basically was to essentially break apart the foundations of the product deep down into the code and try and enhance the quality of the conversation between Alexa and the consumer. And I remember thinking at the time how much they'd have to. I wonder how much they'd have to tweak the sort of the algorithms or whatever it is to make the product feel as human as possible. And I know Alexa have been doing super sort of well over the last few years, but when do you think it'll be that this form of artificial intelligence becomes sort of like fully embedded within everyday life? I mean, it seems to be kind of there at the minute, but it's not fully there. Like if you sort of take the property market, for example, when do you think it might be when property developers actually start installing Alexas like behind walls in the kitchen? Do you think we'll get to a stage where that's just the norm?
So what I would tell you is we're there.
Oh
The
wow,
future
okay.
is here. It's
Hmm.
just unevenly distributed right now.
Okay.
Okay.
Hmm.
And so I think we talk to so many different, a big part of the IoT of this is being able to embed those things where you want them. It doesn't matter what thing that is.
Hmm.
Obviously we make remarkable things that have it embedded, but we have made her embeddable in any IoT device if you so want. And one of the things that I love so much about our ecosystem of skills is that it's an open ecosystem that
Hmm.
any brand can come in and create an intelligent skill. And so what I would tell you is that I don't think that there's necessarily going to be um, necessarily just maybe one voice behind it, but you're certainly starting to see that voice embedded in places that you didn't know it was. One of my favorite things to do actually is going to Amazon.com and clicking on both the skills, but also all the connected devices from third-party manufacturers, right, who are embedding her directly into that. And the only reason I'm not saying her name right now is because I'm worried she's going to trigger a conversation.
I was
In
gonna
our house,
say,
we call her the Glorious Miss A.
yeah, yeah, smart move, smart move. I can imagine that would get quite frustrating. Do you think it'll get to the point where you'll be able to change the, or you might be able to do so already, change the, so rather than saying Alexa, do you think you might be able to tweak the name of it?
You can do it today.
Oh, you can. Okay.
Yes, you can do it today.
Wow.
It is if you go into your Divine Miss A app
Mm.
and you look there, you can actually it is what is the trigger word, right?
Ah,
So
okay.
you can in that core feature you can do that today. So you can customize it, and we're really trying to put so much of the power of this intelligence into the hands of our users.
Mm.
Because here's what I know for sure: customers are way smarter than we are. We try to do these and innovate in such inclusive ways that, I want the customers to feel like they have a say in how we design these things, because
Mm.
the reality is that we don't have all the answers, but if we listen to our customers really carefully, they're going to give us answers that inspire yet new innovations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's totally true. It just made me think then when you were talking, there's been times within technology where sometimes things haven't sort of progressed or become as popular or as mainstream as you'd think. 3D TVs spring to mind as soon as I say that. Obviously, there was I might be wrong, but I think there was kind of like a supply and demand issue where they were making all these 3D TVs, but they didn't really have the content to show on it. And with VR too, VR has been around for 20 plus years. I remember this old Nintendo headset which used air quotes VR, and everything pointed in the direction of artificial intelligence. But do you think there will be a similar issue with sort of virtual assistants where people sort of nibble at the idea but don't fully buy? Or do you think it'll take a long time or it might take a long time for people to fully adjust to? Because I probably give it around about 5 years before people start to become fully all right with the idea of being around all this technology and being okay with how intrusive they once thought it felt. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and it's here's one thing I never do is predict the predict the future. Uh,
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I can only share with you what I know for sure, right? What's true now. Although I will tell you that we do live here at Amazon, we do live a good 2 to 5 years in the future, and that is our
Hmm.
purpose. But here's what I will say, we know for sure, right? We have more than 100 million devices in the marketplace that have the Divine Missé pre-installed, and we're only seeing that grow.
Hmm.
And that to me is super exciting, because the more accessible, again, when you get to play the role of designing the tools that make those technologies more accessible for people to embed into their inventions,
Hmm.
right? That we continue to expand the ecosystem, I think that we will see that is a force multiplier. So what's interesting, I don't think that we're going to see just one, kind of device. We're going to see many, and you're going to see them in different ways. Just as you gave the in the wall example,
Hmm.
we're seeing them in the kitchen. I'm seeing it in the bathroom. I'm seeing it in my closet. I'm seeing it in all these different places, and yet. I think we are now having a conversation about, where are they best adopted, right?
Hmm.
Where are the best use cases? And the reality is, we're learning that every day, and our customers tell us what they are,
Yeah.
right? Our customers, by just utilizing it. I love, you know, the best part of being a designer is knowing that you have the humble empathy to observe what customers are doing with it. And one of my favorite use cases behind Echo is a very inclusive design tenant. It helps folks who are hard of seeing,
Hmm.
um, and aging parents whose dexterity through arthritis may be really tough on a phone, but voice is still there and still open. And that to me, to see the usages, everyday usages of being able to control their world in a way that makes the world more accessible to them is not just heartwarming, but it drives you to continue to do more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when it tugs at the heartstrings like that, and you see what sort of how it really is having an effect on people, not just for leisure, but for just for everyday usage and stuff like that. I spoke to someone from Uber last week who was telling me about what they're sort of looking into in the future of sort of technology. And surprisingly, they're not focusing on driverless cars. However, they are looking at flying cars,
Yeah.
which I was just gobsmacked by it when they mentioned that, and they're
Hey,
calling
and
it.
but if you think about it, it was General Motors at the World's Fair, right, in the 50s who promised us jetpacks. I want my jetpack. Like, I'm there already. Like, why do I need to
Yeah,
drive on a road when if you can turn everybody into a pilot?
that would be awesome, wouldn't it?
And I grew up with superheroes. Wonder Woman's one of my favorite ones. It was definitely my little sister's. And I used to spend my time trying to build that invisible flying ship, you
Mm.
know? And I think that, as we look now, the thing that's the most exciting is I might actually live to see it.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. You think we'd be kind of there already, don't you? Yeah, with the whole jetpack. There's a guy who I follow on YouTube who I think he was an ex-Marine in the UK, and he built one of the first sort of jetpacks, and I think he's just been given permission to use it in an area called Lympstone in the UK, where they do all the Marine sort of training. But yeah, sort of off topic there. But the Uber, anyway, they're calling it the Uber Air, and they're actually hoping to release it next year. Which when he mentioned next year, I was just thinking that's crazy, considering we haven't really heard anything. Or maybe next year they're going to announce something. Just looking at this and like all the different types of technology, which is fairly similar, do you think designers or like the average traditional designer's role will change?
Yes.
With
So yeah, I do.
because it's
I,
got to, right?
well, here's what I would tell you, and I think this is going to be true of every discipline. And creative. The emergence of the design technologist is merely a new generation of designers who understand how to code, who understand that the world that we are building today is written in code.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but you're seeing that in med tech, ed tech. You like give me an industry and I'll give you the tech slang for it, right? The technification of it. And
Yeah.
so if you know that like fintech and med tech, there isn't going to be one creative discipline in any one of those industries that doesn't have a understanding that the world is written in code, and in order for us to design it, you're gonna have to be a design technologist. The design
Yeah, yeah.
technologist is merely, the way that we used to think about UX, some separate, orthogonal thing to design, but in the reality, they're a difference. And so what I'm seeing now is the emergence of things like architectural design and tech. Design technologists being in those spaces are really exciting to me. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why in the paper that I wrote 2020, the emergence of the design technologist, number one in demand role in the United States today is a designer who can code. And so
Mm-hmm.
what that tells me is that in a 10-year period, if you're a designer who doesn't code, you very likely may find yourself on the unemployment line. And the
Mm-hmm.
beauty of what we have today is that in order to educate yourself in, writing code, frankly, all you need to do is a YouTube search. The
Yeah.
information's there,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And what's really exciting to me is one of the organizations I follow is called Tech Jobs USA. And Tech Jobs USA is an org that is going to the interior of America and retraining these skill sets out of the existing information that's sitting in our environment that they just maybe didn't have access to or knowledge that it was there. So I go from being a coal miner to potentially being a design technologist sitting inside a windmill factory,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the opportunity's there. It's whether or not we decide we're going to sit on Twitter and be slacktivists or get to the business of
Yeah.
reinventing industry. That's the point in time we're at. And so what's really exciting to me about the design technologist emergence is that you are seeing that emergence just filter into every aspect of design and every discipline of creative.
Mm-hmm. I am sorry, I lost you for a second then. The sound went. I lost the last few words you were
Ah,
saying. I got the majority of it. I would love to learn how to code, and I you're totally right. You can do anything on YouTube these days. You can just you can become anything you want just by looking at YouTube. And I've tried dabbling in code before, and JavaScript and HTML and CSS and stuff, but I guess I'm not lazy. I'm more of a visual kind of thinker, and but I do have friends who code, and it's incredible. It's an incredible skill, because they're there sort of writing away, and they're sort of envisioning something visual without something visual being there. And it's kind of it's a different sort of skill, it feels like. And there's so much to sort of, as a designer who sort of doesn't code, I guess it feels like there's so much going on. Like if you look at sort of like social media content, that, I think from a designer point of view, that could be another sort of exciting area to start watching out for.
Absolutely. So, you know what? There's a phenomenal course at MIT that you don't even need to take the course. Sorry, MIT. But you can go buy the book and read it. It's called Civic Media. And then go follow Joy Ito, who is the head of the MIT Media Lab. Because I think there's tremendous ways to think about social media that can be used for good. Let's be really clear about what the intent of how we use technology. I think that both of our countries and democracies as a whole are going through an awakening that the tools that we created that were so democratic might be turned against us. And the reality is that maybe we were spending too much time with poor intent in those technologies anyways. And so what's exciting to me is to see the emergence of content creators who are really focused on filling the social media airwaves with more civic-minded initiatives that get people organized to take on some of these really big challenges. That's exciting to me. It's not about the time that you spend on it. I always look at it and say, we can all sit back and go, oh, it's social media problem. Well, when Hitler came out with Mein Kampf, was it really the book's fault that he wrote it? Right?
Yeah.
So look at it, and I look at it and go, okay, well, we need to reclaim our tools. We don't need to come rescind from them, but we need to reclaim them. And we need to reclaim them in a way that says we need to be intelligent and know the difference between a sock puppet and somebody who's astroturfing and Russian bots who are spreading, disinformation, which is a lot to ask for. And we need to be, as those tech innovators, looking for those things. But now that we have we need to re-inform public and get to the business of the initiative of crafting all of that content in a way that inspires, that informs, that reconnects us to things that matter most to us in our lives, not reconnecting us to, underground hate groups. Or, if you went on Twitter today and you saw what was trending, you went, is that really the only thing that's going on in the world? And the answer to that is no. That is not the only thing that's going on in the world. If you look at my Design 2020 study, what you're going to see is that the Twitter sphere completely missed what's going on in the space race. And it's not a race, it's a collaboration now.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
You're going to go like, oh, whoa, you know what? This conversation about legalization of marijuana is so overdue because there's so many folks and benefits to it that we get to rethink the system. So there's so much going on that if you go onto social media channels as a creator, my dare to you is to look at it as a piece of civic media and to put an intent into that media, not just to win an election, right? But to better the world and solve some of these really tough problems with smarter conversations as opposed to clapbacks.
Absolutely, 100%. It kind of feels like the social media is sort of saturated with all this sort of content, which is just trying to poke and aggravate people. Yeah, it's a tricky one, and it's a subject which interests me massively. Sort of social media and what it's used for, and where it's going, and what it, how we should take it and consider it and stuff. But are you an avid social media user?
I am, and I have been for many years. And
Mm.
it's really funny that it's that I used it for many years, but I've used it as a platform to talk about design and innovation.
Yeah.
Generally, hey, here are the things I'm working on. Try to galvanize people that I do utilize it from time to time to try to uncover or put a spotlight on things that are really important to me.
Mm.
And so one of the areas that's super important to me that I even posted on, in the morning, one of the first things that I might do is not necessarily just take a look on what's trending, but I go into it every day with a bit of intent. And right now, having more women and people of color and LGBTQ plus people in technology at the table of design debating with us is so important. And not just from a diversity standpoint, it is to me the inclusion of more people at the table will only make things better, will make our products better, they'll be more innovative, and it always contributes to if we don't have people that are reflective of our customer base designing some of the things that we're creating with customer, we may misinterpret the signals coming from our customers.
Hmm.
And so for me, that initiative and intent while being on social media is really clear. So I tend to use my voice and platform for exactly that. So one of the things, that I think that we consistently hear from people, which is, God, it's so tough to find women in STEM or women in design. I call it STEAMed, right? Science, technology, engineering, arts, math, and design. So when you
Nice.
get it's really tough to find people of color or, Latinos or LGBTQ people in
Mm.
those, in this society. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Are, is it hard to find? Or are we just not in the right spaces? So for me, it's about highlighting those designers that are underrepresented um, to people who are out there hiring.
Mm.
We've got hundreds and even thousands of jobs open across all of tech. And yet we're all complaining about, hey, where are we going to find these folks? Well, guess what? There are online communities and social communities that already exist that we need to start utilizing as recruiting tools
Yeah.
and invite those communities to the table. And the thing that I love, again, the most about being at Amazon is that intent is in what we do every single day. And so when your values align to the corporate culture's values of an organization, what you walk away with is just a happier existence. And so
Hmm.
that's, my use of social media is correcting information, bad information that's out there. Let's be very clear. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of, I would say, corporate hate right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of bringing corporations to the table and really fundamentally understanding the problem space. And the second part of that is highlighting underrepresented designers in our world to get them connected to the opportunities that are right there for them.
Mm. But no, that's really interesting that you're on social media and you're using it for the right reasons. I've seen a promotion as well that you were included in. You've got a talk coming up with Envision. Is that right?
I do. So next week on Wednesday the 1st, I get to present, here is Design 2020. So if you've read Design 2020,
Hmm.
fantastic. That was just the primer.
Nice.
What I will be doing over the next year is outlining those trends as they're emerging all the way to 2020, and then talking with the people who are emerging as those leaders in space and entrepreneurship in a limited series podcast. But the work that I'm going to be doing with 2020 is really I will be kicking off with Envision. I will have another keynote. And again, what's beautiful at the Design 2020 talk is that, it is really about both telling the story about what is happening here as we get to 2020 Because so much of us, it feels like, wow, we're 20 years into this thing, into the 21st century, and let's have an active conversation about where we need to be and what's emerging. Because I think at a time today, we spend a lot of time on what's trending on Twitter versus what's really going on in the real world.
Yeah.
And so a part of that is really shining a light on the people who are leading the charge as a method of inspiration to invite more people into this space, because this space is full of opportunity and there is a ton of work to do. And there simply aren't enough people to do it yet.
That sounds great. Is it? Sorry, did you say it was going to be streamed anywhere, or was
It
it?
is. So the Envision piece is going to be streamed, and then again, I will be in London,
Cool.
in a few of the folks, hopefully your listeners' backyard,
Yeah, yeah.
and at the DNAD as a keynote speaker, and then
Nice.
this year at Cannes, I will be also, again connecting parts of the 2020 conversation to the great creators that are at Cannes Lions this year.
Ah, okay.
All with a run up to what I hope is a really good talk with the 3% conference as we run up into 2020. So
Awesome. So
I will be on the road and talking 2020, but doing so in a way that is inviting people to take part in that 2020 invention.
that's great. That sounds fantastic. And I see you're a jury president at DNAD as well. Is that
I
right?
am. I am.
Cool.
One of the things I really love about the award shows is number one, when you get to be on a jury, you get to see some of the world's great creative.
Yeah,
It passes
absolutely.
by you. And the act of being inspired by other people's work is so important. Award shows aren't just for the awardees and recognition, but it is a time for us to pause as creators and look at work that is redefining what it means to be creative. And so for me, it's a really exciting time. And being jury president is such an honor. It's such an honor because, I look at the jury that I'm on, which is the digital design jury, and it is just a lineup of rock stars and championship players, team players out of every part of the industry. The diversity is really uncanny. And so to be able to have a meeting of the minds and really look at what's defining the bar in digital design. And the exciting part about this is it's like we've moved in the category from just advertising, although that's a very big part of what doing, but it's actually the tools and the user experiences that are enabling all of this great creativity from other people too.
Mm.
So to see platforms included in there, to see the Internet of Things, included in there, right? What are the new connected devices and spaces that are really exciting and that are truly solving problems is a remarkable place to be. And that place of being president, I look forward just to collaborating and being in a jury room where we can debate what is a good user experience. Let's
Hmm.
have an honest debate about those things and then come away with a list of people who rightfully worked to define that space.
Yeah. I mean, I love DNAD as well. I've been there a few years, and I did some portfolio reviews there a couple of years ago where it was kind of like a mock interview setting with the students, and they sort of come in and go through the work, and some of the work is just incredible. I mean, each year, it's just the talent is just insane. It just keeps on getting better and better. And I was saying this to a friend the other day. I kind of every time I see a new student's piece of work, I just makes me really reevaluate my whole portfolio of work, and I'm just like, oh,
I
that's so good.
Isn't it? And you know what? I have to tell you, I remember being a student, right? Or being at a desk somewhere and getting my D&AD book, or seeing the pencil book that they put out, whether it
Mm.
was D&AD or One Club, right? They used to put out print books and flipping through the pages as a nascent designer going, one day I'll have work in that show. And
Yeah,
and so you now look at it and say, I never dreamed I'd be president of that show. Or
that's
in
awesome.
this category. So, to have that honor to go from the kid dreaming about putting the work in the show to the creative being, awarded, awards in those categories to actually being the president, that is a trajectory that I certainly never imagined for myself, and find it quite humbling.
Oh yeah, I would too. It's an incredible achievement, and it's an awesome title to have as well, jury president at D&AD. But it's been great. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you and speak to you, and I'm going to come away from this feeling super inspired. Everything that you've said is just been an eye opener for me. It really has, and I know the listeners are going to love it as well. And thanks again for being on. It's an absolute pleasure to have spoken to you, and yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. If I had one thing just to leave you with,
Please do, yeah.
yeah, one thing to leave you with and with your listeners
Hmm.
we are all creators. We were all born with a creative sense. Sometimes that creativity is trained out of us, but
Hmm.
we are at one of the most important inflection points in our history. And what I believe, and I know for sure, is that we all have the ability to be problem solvers. Some of us do it a little bit more artfully than others. But what I would hope is that folks come away with more of a sense and a semblance of the opportunities that lie in front of us. Because if we only allow the challenges to define us, we will not have taken the opportunity to make the future that has already arrived accessible to everyone. And so, my encouragement to you and your listeners is take a step back and a breath. Look at what's in front of us in terms of challenges and apply our creativity to dare to design a little bit of that future today for someone else.
That's great. That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I can't thank you enough. I really can't. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joanna. I really appreciate your time and being on. And we'll keep in touch through LinkedIn.
Let's do that. Let's through LinkedIn and on Twitter. I'm at Jojo Bickley, Jojo Bickley on Twitter.
Cool.
I'm pretty active there and on LinkedIn. So I look forward to continuing the conversation with you and your listeners.
Absolutely. That sounds great. Thank you so much again, Joanna. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye-bye.